Hi, my name is Josie, and I'm going to be making a YouTube video for this YouTube channel to talk about the minimum wage for tipped workers and how there needs to be an increase and how we need to do away with the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers in the United States, seeing as it is not a livable wage for these workers. And yeah, I will be going over a couple of policy briefs that I found to support this argument, and I will also be going over a couple of the YouTube videos that I found which support my argument. You can find all of the YouTube videos. I found 10 YouTube videos in a playlist that I made on this channel. So yeah, I'm gonna get into it now. One of the first briefs that I found was by the Economic Policy Institute, and it was written by Sylvia Allegretto and David Cooper. And essentially, it was advocating for an elevated minimum wage for tip workers. And it does so by including a very shocking statistic, which is that non-tipped workers who make a standard higher minimum wage have a poverty rate of 6.5%. Contrasting this with the tipped workers who have a poverty rate of 12.8%. Mind you, these workers are working the same hours a week. It's just that they have different wages, and that the non-tipped workers have a standard higher minimum wage. And their pay is more consistent. Meanwhile, tipped workers, since they have the sub-minimum wage and their pay is not consistent on a day-to-day basis, seeing as one day they might make more money than the next, they have a higher rate of poverty. So this contributes to the idea that we need to eliminate the sub-minimum wage as to ensure that workers are making a consistent amount of money, which will hopefully lift them out of poverty. The next is also by Sylvia Allegretto, except it is from the Institute for Labor on Research and Unemployment. This brief focuses on women and women in the tipped industry by noting that 72% of all workers in the tipped industry are women. So for this reason, it shows that if a higher tipped minimum wage is enacted, it would be helpful in decreasing the poverty that does exist between women and their families. This is also helpful for single parents, and seeing as single working parents, 80% of that group are women. Again, by eliminating the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, this would help women and their families. The lack of increase in the minimum wage for tipped workers is accountable for the gendered wage gap that does exist and continues to grow. And so by eliminating the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, this would help close the wage gap that exists between men and women, specifically in the tipped worker industry, since over half of tipped workers are women, which this brief takes note of. A third brief is by David Cooper for the Economic Policy Institute, talking about why DC should implement Initiative 77, which is essentially another version of the Fair Wage Act. And this brief does so by comparing the District of Columbia to Seattle and San Francisco, seeing as Seattle and San Francisco are two cities that currently have implemented the Fair Wage Act. And many people who are in disagreement about eliminating the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers state that it's because it would hurt businesses, and that they would not be able to pay their workers a fair wage, and therefore they would have to let go of workers, or that businesses would just go out of work and they'd have to close because they can't afford to pay their workers, or they'd just go out of business. And this brief does find that in Seattle and San Francisco, they have found that restaurants actually move out of small business territory, which is having 20 or less employees, and they actually have been able to hire more, and they actually become full service and larger. And here's when I would like to talk about two YouTube videos that I attached in the playlist. One is from the Economic Policy Institute, which they found that the research growth or restaurant growth is projected to be stronger in states that have done away with the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers based on their findings. And this is supported by a YouTube video from the More Perfect Union, which states that in California, a state that has done away with sub-minimum wage and has enacted the Fair Wage Act, California had the highest rate of restaurant sales and higher rate of restaurant growth. And the video also states that the Denny's CFO said that it actually improved business to raise the wages to $15 an hour for the minimum wage for tipped workers. And the logic behind this is that when employees are making more money, they're putting it back into the economy, either through that same business or other businesses. And seeing as though California has the highest rate of restaurant sales, it makes sense because they are being, like, the tipped workers in that economy are making more money and in turn putting it back into the economy. Yeah, and my last policy brief is by the Food Labor Research Center at UC Berkeley, and it was created by the National Black Workers Center Project, and it's talking about Biden's COVID relief plan, how supporting it will cure the racist minimum wage. This brief is centered around the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers and specifically Black Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. Key findings were that Black waiters do already earn less than their white counterparts, and then when the COVID-19 pandemic occurred and regulations were enforced, they found that Black workers enforcing these regulations, as a result, were earning less tips than their white counterparts. And by supporting Biden's COVID relief plan, as well as supporting the One Fair Wage Act, it would help close the race wage gap that exists for Black waiters, seeing as they would get a higher base minimum wage and that they wouldn't have to rely on tips that they receive, which they already receive at a lower amount as compared to their white counterparts, seeing as their minimum wage would be higher, and they wouldn't be at the mercy of customers for their pay, for their earning. I hope this was informative, and yeah.